Hi, I'm Tracy Fessenden. I'm co-directing the Recovering Truth Project at Arizona State University, and I am thrilled today to be talking with Athena Aktipis, who is one of our project fellows and a brilliant scientist at Arizona State University. She is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology. She describes her work as that of a social psychologist, an evolutionary biologist, and a cancer biologist, as well as a cooperation theorist. And cooperation is the through line that seems to unite all of these various roles and all of the projects that Athena is currently pursuing, or in some cases has just finished. She has just published a book with Princeton University Press called The Cheating Cell: How Evolution Helps Us Understand and Treat Cancer. She has another book about cancer on the way. And she has a very popular 1-minute introductory video that we love to show students at ASU on why we human beings are cooperation incarnate. It is absolutely an honor and a privilege, Athena, to have you with us in the Recovering Truth Project. So I'm hoping you can say a little bit about what you're working on and how it relates to the themes of Recovering Truth.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be part of this project. My work really focuses on cooperation and conflict across systems. So everything from how human beings cooperate with each other in small-scale societies to the ways that cells in our body interact with each other to make us viable as humans. I also work on microbiome and fermented foods and cooperation and conflict in there. And one of the things that I see across all of these systems is that there's very often this tension where as groups get larger, as cooperative groups get larger, the potential threats from cheating become much more of a impediment to the group functioning. And that cheating can be, a matter of like resource exploitation, but it can also be one can also cheat by sending false information. One can cheat by exploiting others through deception. So there are, I think, very, very fundamentally these, connections between these questions about how we share information, the fidelity of that information, and how we as a society can operate and function in a cooperative way.
So what would you say is the primary takeaway of your research for the moment we find ourselves in, where our inability to control the pandemic stems in large part from an absence of cooperation, an absence of public trust? What can we find in your work that can help us muddle through a little bit better?
Yeah, well, there certainly are a lot of aspects of what's going on now that fit with various kinds of cooperation dilemmas. So, when you have to make some personal sacrifice for the, public good, or if you have to make some immediate sacrifice for, long-term good for yourself or your community, those are all dilemmas that really kind of fit within the framework that I use in my work. We also actually have a project where we're looking at changes in cooperation and interdependence over the course of the pandemic. So we started collecting data at the beginning of March before the pandemic was declared, and we've been collecting data regularly. We now have our 10th time point collected. So we're going to be able to really look at how cooperation is changing, how people's perceptions of interdependence are changing. We've pre-published some of it on SciArchive. So we have some data for time periods 1 through 4 that are available if people are interested in looking at that. So we also have a website that I put together with some of my colleagues. I have a website put together with some of my colleagues called cooperationintheapocalypse.org. And I have a blog post on there kind of talking about our research. So if people are interested, that's a broadly accessible resource for learning about the work that we're currently doing and what we've done so far.
When we look back on this year, one of the remarkable things that I will note is that you were already doing a zombie apocalypse podcast when the pandemic hit. So yeah. You just sort of rolled right into this one.
Yeah. We also had a meeting in October of 2018 called the Zombie Apocalypse Medicine Meeting, where we looked at, how can we kind of use this framework of zombies and the zombie apocalypse as a way of wrapping our collective brains around the problems that we're facing now and are likely to face in the future. And so we're holding another one in October of 2020, and it is going to be this really awesome concept. It's going to be mostly, maybe all online, but it's going to be in the context of zombie TV. So we're launching Channel Z, which is television in the zombie apocalypse, and it's going to feature shows that are kind of in this frame that the zombie apocalypse is happening, and how do we understand it? How do we cope with it? How do we, deal with the diversity of manifestations of zombies that are present? And it's basically a way for us to kind of blend interdisciplinary scholarship with kind of a platform that allows for more imagination and more playful engagement, that I think allows us to really ask tough questions, deal with scary things, but in a way that isn't intimidating, in a way that's fun and accessible, and both provide sort of an interdisciplinary platform and accessible platform for broader audiences.
Athena, Aktipis, from your perspective, are we living in a post-truth era?
Are we living in a post-truth era? I think we are living in an era where the idea of information that has high fidelity, high truth value is it's really being challenged by the way that we share information, and oftentimes inadvertently through our behaviors online and on social media platforms, we end up sometimes amplifying things that I would say have a low truth value, but they're able to get our attention, or they're able to activate our emotions, and sometimes zombify us, I'd say, to spread them. And so I think a lot about this in terms of the evolutionary dynamics of memes. And I'm not just talking about memes in the sense of ideas that people spread quickly online, but the more sort of biological roots of the idea that Richard Dawkins put forward, which is that units of information that can go from brain to brain, some of them proliferate really well, others not as much. Some are good at getting their hosts to spread them, others are not, right? It's basically viral kinds of dynamics, and that happens for information. And oftentimes those things that spread are not necessarily the things that are true. And sometimes there's also a bias where things that are not true might get more attention than things that are more likely to be true. So I think there's a real challenge with the way that our ability to share information has scaled up, and not just in terms of ability to reach people over space, but also the quick turnaround and spread that's possible. So both spatial and temporal scales of this have just gotten to such a large scale that it's totally unprecedented. And I do think that that's a challenge to maintaining that fidelity of information that ultimately is really important to having a large scale society that works and that can effectively cooperate.
So you've told us a little bit about how we may have gotten here. Where do you see us going from here? What are the steps we need to take now to get a hold of this problem?
Yeah, so in terms of steps to take to get a hold of the problem, I think that probably the first thing is becoming aware of the ways that we get zombified by information. And by like if you see something or you hear something and you have a emotional response and you're like, oh, I got to share this, that should actually be a red flag. You should ask yourself, oh, why am I having this response? Is this coming from some thing that is, is truly a valuable piece of information that others in my environment should have access to, or is it coming from something else? Am I just being hijacked by this information to spread it? So I think becoming aware of that zombification is really important. I also think that having a chance to really reflect on the values that you have and that you want to share, and having that reflected in the behavior that you have on social media platforms and online. I think that it's important to really kind of close that loop, so that those value, you having those value conversations with yourself when you're considering what to do in the online space. And it would be really nice if we had some mechanisms for kind of broader structural ways of dealing with this, but it seems like at the moment the business model for a lot of social media platforms is based on advertising and behavior change for those of us who consume information on them. So I think that at least at the moment, our best defense or offense is to just be more aware, more mindful of the ways that we might be getting hijacked and the things that we can do to align our behaviors more with our own values.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great.